Welcome to episode 2 of my addiction and recovery podcast. My name is Brett Levens. I'll be rolling these out every couple of weeks, hopefully bringing you some interesting people, some interesting conversations, and for me too. So today's is going to be with Jim. Such a good person, such a good man, and I'm thrilled to bring you his story, which is pretty cool. So let's listen in and check out our conversation about alternatives to AA. When I started this, I started thinking about people that I wanted to interview. And one of the first people that I thought of was you, because of all the years that I've been doing this, I've not run into anybody quite like you. Your story is very unique. So I'd like to poke at that a little bit and give you the opportunity to share a little bit of your story if that sounds intriguing to you.
Yeah, no, that actually sounds kind of fun.
Yeah. Okay, good. So the setup for those that are tuning into this, because we're recording now, Jim, is Jim and I have been going to the same meeting now for a couple of years at least, and we've gotten to know each other, our stories a bit, and what I really find Jim's story to be very unique. At least in my time in recovery as somebody who, basically leaned on AA for at least the early years. And so Jim, maybe you can start by telling a little bit about how long you've been sober, and then maybe tell a little bit about your jumping off point. Where, at what point did you realize you might have a problem? And then maybe we can lean into the different approaches you've took that weren't AA. Because a lot of people are really resistant to AA, right? For whatever reasons. And so I'm super curious about, or I'm trying to bring people this idea that there are a lot of ways to do this. And you embody one of, or some of them. So Jim, the floor is yours. Will you please share some information? Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. I've been in recovery and sober for a little over 2.5 years. I'm 75 right now, and pretty much from the age of 20 all the way up until 72, I drank fairly heavily, but I was always kind of functional. I managed to do my job. I was never late to work. Drank sort of secretly most of my life. It was only until after I retired, where I started drinking more, and one thing led to another. And pretty soon I was drinking during the day, and I was drinking just way too much. I realized that it was an issue, but I never thought it was that big of a deal until my wife started really pointing out to me what a big a deal it was. She finally got to a point to where she said, "Look, you need to do something about this." So I started out, I had a lot of preconceived notions about what AA was, and I didn't like the picture that had formed in my mind. I couldn't imagine myself sitting in meetings and sharing with other people. I had pretty much drunk myself into a state of being totally isolated and depressed. But my wife started giving me ultimatums about doing something about it, and I had been seeing a therapist who was on me about going to AA meetings. And I resisted her for over a year. And finally, she hooked me up with a woman who had some additional resources. And I found out that there was a meeting that was not an AA meeting that was within a mile of my house. So I started going to that meeting. And that was a group called LifeRing, which is one of a whole handful of meetings that are intended to be alternatives to AA for people who don't necessarily resonate with AA. So I started going to this LifeRing meeting, and in that meeting, what I started hearing was, if you're going to really be serious about recovery, your recovery has got to be your number one priority. And I sat in LifeRing meetings for probably 2 or 3 months, listening to other people's stories, talking about my story. But one day I had actually heard sobriety has got to be your number one priority. And I realized at that point that I was not only bullshitting all the people in the meeting, I was bullshitting myself, because I was sitting there in the meeting saying all the right things and then in the back of my mind going, yeah, this is all well and good, but I'm not going to quit drinking forever. I'll drink at some point. So that was when I realized if I was going to do something about it, I really did need to get serious. And then one thing led to another. And my wife pretty much pushed me to the point to where she said, you're not going to have a wife anymore unless you go to rehab. And the idea of rehab scared the shit out of me. I thought, oh my God, I had no idea what that was all about. I had lots of, again, preconceived notions, but I agreed and I went to rehab. The thing that was cool about rehab is that I went to a center that was not a 12-step rehab center. And as a result, every week that we were there, they introduced us to all of these other possibilities in terms of support groups. AA was one. They brought in LifeRing to do a meeting every week. They brought in a group called Recovery Dharma, which is based on Buddhist principles. They brought in a group called Smart Recovery. There's a group in Colorado called AFR, Advocates for Recovery. They came in and did a meeting every week. But the message that we were being given is don't let anybody dictate to you what your recovery should look like. The idea was you should be able to see the smorgasbord of possibilities and pick things that resonate with you. And so during the time I was in rehab, I really hooked into LifeRing primarily because LifeRing meetings were different from AA in that they allowed crosstalk. And I thought there was a lot of value in sharing stories, not only with everybody in the room, but hearing feedback from everybody in the room too, because the reality is there's a lot of expertise sitting in those meetings because of people who've been there, done that. The other meeting I really resonated with was Recovery Dharma. And what got me hooked to that initially were the 10-minute meditations they did at the beginning of every meeting. That got me really interested in Recovery Dharma. But then the further I got into it, the more I realized that the Buddhist principles that they were advocating lined up really well with the CBT kind of stuff I was learning in rehab, and really was, I think, supporting folks who had a difficult time with the higher power idea of AA. The idea in Recovery Dharma and in Buddhist teachings is that you sort of drive the ship, and it's your thought processes that you have to change and how you react to the world that you have to change that make you successful in recovery. So I came out of rehab really hooked into LifeRing and Recovery Dharma primarily. I then
All right, let me pause you just real quick because there's going to be some people that don't know some of the terms that you just said.
okay.
So let's pause just a second here. Crosstalk. So those of you that don't know what it means to walk into a recovery meeting, crosstalk basically has to refers to people talking about what you've said, more or less, right? So help me here, Jim, if I'm wrong, but my understanding, the way I think about crosstalk is some meetings really frown on it, like this idea that I would say anything, you have a share, and I would say anything about it would be considered not okay. And crosstalk would be, I might say something about Jim's share. Jim might have said something. I say, well, I had something similar happen or whatever. And so that's just an awareness for somebody who's coming in the rooms. Did I encapsulate that the way you think about it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that actually is another distinction. LifeRing is a meeting that encourages crosstalk. Recovery Dharma is a meeting that doesn't. So a Recovery Dharma meeting is a lot like an AA meeting in that respect.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm just setting people up. So for a lot of people that might be hearing this, especially if you're thinking, first off, I don't want to go, but I'm going to go. And first off, you don't have to say jack all, right? I totally sat in the back. I got out of there before the meeting was over. And you can do whatever you want, and it's okay. There's going to be people that care, and they may try to, have a conversation with you. But if you don't want to, just hit your car and off you go. It's no big deal. But in some meetings, it's good to know kind of the rules. And instead of having a surprise, somebody say, we don't allow crosstalk, which I've seen. And that the last thing you want to do is like have somebody feel uncomfortable, right?
Exactly.
So the other one that you mentioned was CBT. Why don't you cover what CBT is as well?
CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, which is sort of a behavioral approach to. It's really the heart of a lot of the tools that you learn in recovery, whether it's in a rehab center or whether it's in one of these groups. A lot of the tools that you learn to manage your recovery boil down to being cognitive behavioral therapy based, if that helps.
It does. So we've got basically three or so here. Your inpatient, was it an inpatient treatment or outpatient treatment that you were in for your
I was in an inpatient treatment center. It was a 2-week program, as opposed to most are 30 days.
And let's get specific, Jim. Did you dig it and would you recommend it? And if you would, what was the name of the organization if they're still cooking?
We're talking about an organization in Denver called West Pines, and I loved it. I keep in mind I don't have a lot of experience with treatment centers that are based on the 12-step or on AA principles, so I may be kind of jaded in that respect. But I've talked to a lot of people who've been in places that were based on the 12 steps. And I think that those are good too. I think that what you're looking for is a place that you feel comfortable in and doesn't force a lot of things on you, that gives you some choice in terms of how you're gonna manage your recovery when you get out.
Yeah, and I'm wired the same. Like you know, I share that, and I've heard a lot of stories over the years of something to the effect of, I needed somebody to tell me exactly what to do. They needed to tell me how to tie my shoes, and I've heard plenty of stories of people who say something like that. And I say, awesome. Like if it works for you, but similar to Jim and maybe somebody that's listening here, there are options, and Jim is like embodies it. So anyway, thanks for taking a little sidecar here. Let's get back to your story if you remember where you were.
I'm not sure I remember exactly where I was, but one of the things I was going to say is that right as I got out of rehab, and I've already said I was pretty well hooked into both LifeRing and Recovery Dharma, I started in a Zoom meeting called MusiCares, which is where I met Brett, which turned out to be, it's for musicians that are in recovery. And the thing that was fascinating to me about that group was that all of a sudden I was in a group of guys that were almost 100% all AA folks. And so over the last couple of years, hanging out in this group, I've gotten a different sort of respect for AA that I didn't have before I went in, because I've been able to see a lot more about what really it involves. And, one of the things that I want to make a point here is that I think that these alternative support groups are awesome for a lot of different reasons. I think the idea of Buddhist principles, meditation, crosstalk, I think those resonate with a lot of people. The thing that I don't like about those support groups is that there is a somewhat of a lack of structure. And I think if you compare that to AA, the structure of AA really forces you into doing the work. And I think these other meetings are really supportive. I think you can get a lot of accountability and mutual support out of those meetings. But when it comes to doing the work that you need to do to become a better person in recovery, I think that the structure of AA provides that for you. So to me, I've ended up kind of thinking that that the approach, again, should be defined by me, but at the same time, I think everybody needs to look at the ability to look at themselves and make changes in their own lives in order to improve their life. One of the things that I got when I was in rehab was the idea that recovery shouldn't just be white knuckling it and making your goal trying not to drink. Recovery should be the ability to recreate your life any way you want now that you've gotten the addiction out of the way. And I think what that entails is taking a hard look at yourself and making some changes in your behavior. You can still do that in these alternative support groups. It's just a little bit more informal than it would be in AA.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you, I think you said that you were going to start maybe going to a couple of AA meetings. Have you still not been in an AA meeting, or have you been in one now?
I have not. I'm struggling a little bit because I have so many other meetings that I'm having trouble fitting LifeRing meetings, AA meetings into my schedule, which is another point I should make. And that is, I went from having too few meetings to too many meetings. And so over the course of the last 2.5 years, I think I've settled on something that really works for me. So I have a meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday every evening. I attend a couple of meetings that are simply meditation meetings that are not necessarily recovery related. So I have probably 7 or 8 meetings that I go to in a week. I can get away with that because I'm retired and I've got the time to do that. I think that would be a little on the difficult side if you're working 8 to 5 in a day job. But I think I found a nice balance where I've also discovered that if you want to talk about the issues that are that are pertinent to you in recovery, you almost have to be able to find people in recovery to talk to, because folks that are not in recovery just don't understand on a deep enough level what you're really going through. And so to me, the value of the connection that you feel and the ability to talk about anything near and dear to your heart comes with these recovery meetings. And so one of the things I tell people that are looking for meetings is that what you do is just test out a lot of meetings. And what you're looking for are 1 or 2 or 3 people in a meeting that you feel comfortable with or that you feel some connection to. There is a meeting. It doesn't matter if it's called AA or if it's called LifeRing or Recovery Dharma. You're really looking to connect with specific people that you feel comfortable with and that you can really talk to. And I think that's the goal for everybody. It should be the goal for everybody in recovery, is finding other folks in recovery that help keep you on track and provide a sounding board and provide you help when you need it.
Yeah. So I want to take a couple notes here. I want to parlay this into something that I'm always super curious about, because part of your story there, you're talking about, I would assume your wife of many years, right? And she's really encouraging it. And so I'm hearing a story that's similar to many, in that you're kind of going along basically by being nudged, but at some point you became to where you wanted it for yourself. And you mentioned somebody saying, make it the number one priority. Do you remember a moment when that happened, or was it gradual? And how do you think about it now in terms of your recovery, your sobriety, as being for you as opposed to for your wife? Or maybe you don't.
Yeah, no, actually, I think that it was my wife that pretty much called my bluff and pushed me into it. But one of the first things that you get when you go to rehab is you're in this for yourself. You're not in this for someone else. And if you're doing it for someone else, chances of your success are pretty slim. You have to be able to make the decision that says, this is really important to me. And I do remember it was when I was sitting in that LifeRing meeting, realizing how much I knew I was bullshitting people in the meeting. I didn't realize I was bullshitting myself. I had been denying that there was a problem for a really, really long time, and always managed to put it off on other people, my wife, my friends, anybody else. It was in that meeting where I went, wow, here I am talking a good game, but I have no intention of quitting. Now, I knew it was a problem because I had started drinking during the day. I was drinking and driving. And I knew it was getting pretty serious. And one of the things that tipped me off is that anytime the issue of alcoholism came up, I got instantly defensive because I didn't want to hear it. And so once I finally realized that I was being defensive because the truth hurts, I decided I needed to do something. The thing that's interesting to me is that I had no idea what I was really getting into, and I mean that in a really good way. I had always pictured I had trouble getting my head around the idea of never taking another drink again as long as I lived. That was a huge barrier for me, and one of the reasons I refused to admit that it was a problem. Once I said, okay, I'm going to try that, and I got into rehab, and then I got into rebuilding my life, things are going so well for me right now that if I'd have known this is what was on the other side of sobriety, I'd have been doing it a long time ago. But you actually have to experience that in order to really understand it, I think. And that's what makes it tough. You can't know just how good recovery can be until you actually get into it and have some amount of success with it.
So it sounds to me like when you walk into the recovery center or whatever, and you sit down, and one of the first lessons on the board or whatever is, hey, you got to be wanting this for yourself. Now, I've heard a lot of stories. I've been around a little while, and there's a common one, and that is what I'm describing, which is until you want it for yourself, you have no shot. And plenty of people will be there, and I think to the way you're describing your story, are saying the right things or whatever, but they've got that little secret, right? That little secret that nobody else knows. That is, I will be drinking again, or I likely will. So it sounds to me like you got hooked into that pretty early on to that. Like, it sounds like you woke up for yourself pretty early on in your days in that recovery facility. Because I think that's what I heard you say is pretty quickly you realized this has to be for me, and you embodied that. Do I have that right?
Yeah. One of the reasons I was so scared to go into rehab was I really had a tough time imagining my isolated self sitting in a room and actually sharing stuff with other people. That thought just freaked the hell out of me. And so when I got into rehab, one of the first or second meetings that I was in, people are sharing, and I'm hearing these stories, and I go, oh my God, these are my people. I'm not alone here. They're talking about issues that I personally have and that I think are unique to me. And I'm hearing, wait a minute, they're not unique to me. And we're all in the same boat. And I also tumbled to the idea that even though we're all different, we come from different demographics, with different ages, with different backgrounds. If you peel the layers of the onion away, we're all the same. And once I heard that in my head, we're all the same, even though some stories are more horrific than others, everybody's the same in that they want to be listened to, they want to be loved, they want to feel connected to other people. I didn't get that connection to other people thing until I actually experienced it in rehab. And that really happened to me within those first couple of meetings, where I got to feel what that was like. Not only to listen to somebody and have myself tear up as I listened to their story,
right,
but how it felt for me to actually put it out there and have it accepted. Yeah. That was huge.
Yeah. It takes me back too, man. It was for me too. It was almost like how these people read my mind. Like, how is it possible that they're saying these words that are exactly how I navigate? So let's take on another one here too, Jim. Like, you've used the word a bunch. I love the word. I used to despise the word. Somebody who's listening to this might feel the same. The word recovery, right? When I heard that word when I first came in, I was like, recovery? You either drink or you don't, right? Recovery. What the heck are you talking about? And then I'd find out there's people in here that have been here 5, 6, 7, 8, 20 years. What are you doing in here? But I think this word recovery is a good one. And my guess is that our understanding of it is similar, but I'd love your take on what does it mean to be in recovery to you?
I don't know. You're making me think a little bit right now. And that is, I would rather say that I'm in recovery than to say out loud that I'm an alcoholic or I'm an addict. And I think both alcoholic and addict have a negative connotation to me, but not only a little bit compared to, I think, people who don't understand this disease. When you say addict or alcoholic, boy, that sends everybody off in a direction of all the preconceived notions that they've got. So to me, it's a little softer and easier to say I'm in recovery. The other distinction I make is that recovery is different from white knuckling it. White knuckling it is having set the goal of not drinking every day and struggling every day to not drink, which is a terrible goal. But recovery, your goal is to improve your life. And I think there's a huge difference there. If I'm in the context of improving my life, then I attend groups, I practice doing things differently, I try to learn things about myself that I can do differently. That all comes with recovery to me. White knuckling it, that doesn't happen. I'm just focused on trying it like hell not to drink.
Yeah.
The other thing, I haven't put a whole lot of thought into this, but I wonder how long, and I got this when you were asking the question, I wonder how long you have to say you're in recovery, because technically I think everybody, whether they're in recovery or not, should be looking to improve themselves on a daily basis. So a person in recovery technically shouldn't be all that different from John Q. Public, who's never had a drinking problem. But I think people in recovery are more focused on self-improvement than John Q. Public. It's one of the reasons I can't talk to John Q. Public very easily, because small talk is sort of the game, which drives me crazy. And talking about anything meaningful is difficult for a lot of folks. In recovery, I don't think that's the case because of what they've been through.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah, that's all good stuff. Yeah, the word recovery, like in the athletic sense too, is if you're running real hard or whatever, or you lift weights or whatever, you have a recovery period, right? And when I think about recovery, I don't know life without booze. I don't know social. I don't know anything about life without booze and drugs until I got sober. And so for me, I think about it like that a bit. It's like it stands to reason that I'm going to have some weird shit going on in my life because I have not experienced life without, either being buzzed or on my way to being buzzed or just flat out drunk.
Well, you know what, Brent, I should have added that in, because I think in addition to being really into trying to improve yourself as a person, you're also in recovery, learning how to deal with life without this crutch that you've always had, or without, like some people say, that was your best friend. Everywhere you went, alcohol went with you. You went to parties, you went to games, you went everywhere. You went with your best friend, alcohol. And so you're having to relearn how to do all those things and find the joy in those things without your best friend.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain grieving that's involved, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And then biologically, I don't know if this resonates with you, but it was true for me. And I've heard it as a pattern as well, is when I finally got dry for a short period of time, my emotions were like super turbulent, like a storm on the sea. Like suddenly I'd just be overwhelmed with sadness or anger. And that went on for like 2 or 3 or 4 months for me, just out of the blue. And, to your point earlier, I had connections with people that were doing it too. And it was like, hey, Chris, I am pissed off for no reason. And he'd say, I am too. What is going on? And I really think that there's a lot going on with I believe this, that there's a lot going on with my biology. And so, I think about it as this idea that the emotions have been turned off for a long time, right?
Yeah.
The human stuff. And then you go back online. Here we
Exactly
go.
right. I've never heard anybody use the exact same number, but everybody will say it takes a year or 2 years for your whole system to just kind of restabilize. And I think that's part of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Do you have any other items you want to throw at? Imagine that you're talking to somebody who's just come in the rooms, or I don't know, anything you want to add, Jim?
Yeah. something that occurs to me, especially when you're brand new into these recovery rooms. Stephen Covey always said the way to establish trust is to trust first. And I think one of the first real stretches that you have when you start going to these groups is the willingness to put yourself out there. And when I first got into these groups, I realized that was really difficult for me. And so I started using these groups as a way to practice being more vulnerable and talking about what was really going on for me and how I really felt, as opposed to hiding it all the time. I think the other thing that I would say is on the other end of it, since I've been sober for 2.5 years, my life has really turned around just in terms of the joy and the happiness that I experience on a daily basis. I am a writer and a composer and had pretty much given that up when I was drinking, because drinking was a higher priority than sitting down and writing music. Since I've been sober, I've gotten back into that, and it's one of the places in my life that I can say I truly experience joy when I sit down and start putting notes on the page again. I feel a sense of purpose again that I think I had lost when I was drinking. It's hard to take my word for it, but if you get into it and you really look at making some changes and trying to improve yourself and learning to deal with life sober, the payoff is just huge. It's just huge. I can't say enough about how cool that is. One thing we didn't talk about, Brett, was relapsing. And one of the things that I have come to believe is that people relapse the number of times they need to relapse in order to really prove to themselves that they can't take another drink again. And I think folks are all in different stages towards finally admitting that I've crossed the line. If I take one drink, I'm going to slide back into the pool. And so I might relapse 2 or 3 times, but every time I learn something. And at some point I'm going to go, yep, I just can't do it. I can't drink like a normal person. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the physiology of the disease. But I abused it for long enough to where I've crossed that line. I'm a unicorn in that respect, because once I quit, I never did relapse. Well, I started, stopped for a long time, every time white knuckling it, trying to do it on my own. Once I did rehab and realized that it's something you can't do on your own, that was what made it successful. So I've been 2.5 years and haven't relapsed yet. And some of my best friends that I still have as best friends have relapsed 3 and 4 times since we've been out of West Pines. And they're just somewhere different on the road to figuring out that they've crossed the line, and they're going to have to admit to themselves that they can't take another drink. It's just really interesting to me that not taking another drink is such an impediment to actually getting started. But once you do it, and you talk to people who've relapsed, one of my first questions is, how long were you sober? Oh, 6 months. How was it? It was awesome. People always talk about being sober is a good thing and how they would not trade it in. What takes people down, I don't know how much I'm allowed to swear on this one, Brett, but I think there are 2 things that take people down who've been sober for a while. One is, I got this, no problem. I've proven to myself I've got it licked. I can go back to drinking like a normal person. That will take you down just as quick as the other one, which is a case of the fuck it's. Just fuck it, I don't care. So one of the things I learned with my AA boys, by the way, my AA group has turned out to be my favorite group because of the people in there, and they're all to a person, all of them, and their willingness to really put it out on the table and talk about what's really going on with them. So I feel like I've got the best of both worlds with that group. And one of the things I've learned in there is those guys that have been sober for 20 and 25 years who will say, you always have to be vigilant. All it takes is a bad decision one day to start drinking again, and it's all gone. So just to know that you have to be vigilant all the time is not necessarily hard to do. It's a thought process that you just have to wear with you wherever you go. So,
yeah, that's well said. And yeah, I'm like you. I'm a unicorn then too, because I don't have relapse in my story.
yeah.
And yeah, and my stock thing on that is the thing is as you know, Jim, I'm big into evidence. So I've gone to enough meetings and heard enough stories. Like there's a distinct pattern, and it goes like this. If you have this thing and you try to drink again, it will not go well. And I am convinced, and I have to be 100% convinced, because if I'm 99% convinced, I'm in trouble. I'm 100% convinced that if I take a swig of something, there's a high probability that I've got a 2, 3, 4 year elevator ride down ahead of me, and all the stuff will come back. So is a great word.
Yeah, no, I agree. I asked my therapist the other day. There's a graph that they do that plots genetic predisposition and the trauma in your background. And depending on the combination of those two things, you could be someone who is at risk already. And all you have to do is drink or drug enough to become addicted. And then there is no going back. And I asked my therapist if there really was such a thing as going back. And he said, well, it might be one person out of 1,000 could go back and drink like a normal person. The other 999 will kill themselves trying. Yeah. And I think that's a great way to look at it. You are a super heavy duty unicorn if you can somehow go back to drinking like a normal person after you've gotten into addiction. So I think it's much safer to just think nobody's going back. Just learn to live your life without drugs and alcohol and find out how great it is.
Yeah. And it is great, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, man. Yeah. It is the best.
Yeah, it's really cool. But like all that stuff that I'd made up about how hard and how difficult and how bored and how could you go to do this and that without drinking? It turns out, that was all the mechanisms of my addiction, continuing to talk me into that next drink.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Jim, thanks for a wonderful chat. I dig our time together, and this has been great to record. I think this will probably have some, maybe help a couple people. So this is
dynamite. I hope so, and I feel the same way, Brett. I could do this forever with you.
Yeah, my 2 favorite topics, man: addiction, music. Hope you enjoyed the conversation with my friend Jim Mick. Such a good dude, and so his energy is so fun to be around, and man, I've learned a lot from that guy, and grateful that he was willing to spend a few minutes with us as somebody who's found other ways to find community, find connection towards fighting off this terrible disease that is addiction and alcoholism. So those that are really, for whatever reason, and I was one of them, are resistant to AA. There are other ways to go about this. So he's just a great example of that. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of these addiction and recovery conversations with me, Brett Levens.